Ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good evening, depending on where you are watching us from. My name is Fabien Anouard Kuswanika. I am proud to present to you a new program entitled Today's In-Depth Topic. In this program, we will delve a bit deeper into a topic from Congolese current affairs. And today, we have chosen to talk to you about the Constant Mutamba trial. The Constant Mutamba case is causing quite a stir, as they say, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. To understand its intricacies, we will first try to define the terms of reference. Who is accusing? Who is Constant Mutamba? And above all, in this program, you will hear about the name Friva. What exactly is Friva? Because the money in question comes from this organization called Friva. Let's start by defining Constant Mutamba. Who is he really? Constant Mutamba is a young Congolese from the Democratic Republic of Congo. He was born on April 24, 1988, in Loputa, in the province of Omami, formerly part of Kasai Oriental. A lawyer by training, he is the founder of DAIPRO, the Progressive Revolutionary Dynamic, so a former opposition member, then Minister of Justice, appointed in May 2024. During his term, he will initiate a few actions. For example, the suspension of the first management team of Friva in July 2024, following investigations into irregularities by the General Inspectorate of Finance. He also organized the General Assembly of Justice in November 2024. A candidate in the December 2023 presidential election, he garnered about 1% of the vote. He is therefore described by some media outlets as a reformer and a promising young figure. And for others, he is a young man with a touch of populism. Let's put it that way. In this program, as I mentioned, we'll be talking about Friva. Friva is the reparations fund for victims of the Uganda War in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Created in December 2019 following the decision of the International Court of Justice condemning Uganda to pay $325 million to the DRC between 2022 and 2027. As you understand, over 5 years. The significant condemnation of Uganda to pay substantial damages to the Democratic Republic of the Congo is an integral part of a complex international dispute that was meticulously judged by the esteemed International Court of Justice. This crucial legal matter specifically relates to the extensive invasion and prolonged occupation of various Congolese territories by Ugandan armed forces during the devastating Second Congo War, which spanned from 1998 to 2003. This particular conflict is widely recognized as one of the most profoundly deadliest and impactful conflicts in the entirety of contemporary African history. To date, according to our information, 3 installments totaling $195 million, American dollars of course, have been paid up to 2024, with compensation finally beginning in August 2024 and more than 14,300 victims compensated as of around May 20th, 2025, notably in the Chopo region. And new branches have also been opened in the provinces of Baswele, Haut-Uele, and Ituri in order to, as they say, strengthen proximity. However, the institution has been the subject of serious criticism, suspicions of embezzlement, lack of transparency in identifying victims, or even in the disbursement of funds. And in June 2025, a report from Filimi highlighted a lack of transparency with a contract awarded without a call for tenders. The amount was inflated to as much as $1 million for a documentary. We discussed this in our previous broadcasts. Starting in July 2024, Mutamba will set up an investigative commission and make the Friva leadership team available to the justice system for investigation and possibly for prosecution over any potential wrongdoing. With these fundamental concepts now clearly defined and understood, this brings us directly to the primary and most significant accusations. Specifically, What exactly is Mutamba Constant formally accused of, and what are the details surrounding these allegations? The now former Minister of Justice of the Democratic Republic of Congo, a prominent figure in the nation's political landscape. The highly anticipated trial of Constant Mutamba is a particularly high-profile and significant legal case that profoundly highlights the critical and complex issues of widespread corruption, governmental governance, and intricate political dynamics within the Democratic Republic of Congo, drawing considerable national and international attention. Here, from our perspective, are a few key points to remember based on the information we have had access to. Constant Mutamba is being prosecuted for the alleged embezzlement of $19 million intended for the construction of a prison in Kisangani. The funds came from the Fund for Reparations and Compensation for Victims of Uganda's Illicit Activities, FREVAU, which I just mentioned to you, and were allegedly awarded by mutual agreement to Zion Construction, a company described as fictitious as it has no headquarters, no qualified personnel, and no proven experience. No construction site or project location has been identified in Kisangani, further reinforcing suspicions that the project is fictitious. And this trial, is proceeding as follows. The trial therefore opened on July 9, 2025, before the Court of Cassation, the highest judicial authority in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It was postponed to July 23rd, after the defense requested time to review the case file. Mutamba was extensively questioned during the hearings, particularly on July 23rd, where he proclaimed his innocence, stating that the funds are still in the bank, specifically Rawbank, and that he has never touched a single dollar of that money. He also maintained that the project followed proper procedures and had the approval of the Prime Minister. During this trial, the defense raised several procedural objections, particularly regarding the irregularity of the National Assembly's vote authorizing the prosecutions. Specifically, they pointed out that the vote was conducted by a show of hands instead of a secret ballot. There was also mention of the summons to the defendant being issued by the court clerk rather than by the public prosecutor's office. Unfortunately for Mutamba, all these motions were rejected by the court, which continued with the proceedings. We arrive at July 30th, 2025. The defense, in a significant legal maneuver, files two distinct motions of unconstitutionality. These motions specifically target the resolutions recently passed by the National Assembly and the crucial decisions rendered by the Court of Cassation. These legal challenges effectively and temporarily halted the ongoing trial, pending a thorough and comprehensive review by the Constitutional Court, which holds the ultimate authority in such matters. At this stage, we can already talk to you about the defense strategy adopted by Mutamba during this trial. Mutamba and his lawyers denounce a political trial, accusing a plot aimed at blocking his judicial reforms and his fight against corruption. He demanded the appearance of high-ranking witnesses, including Prime Minister Judith Suminwa, to support his defense. Mutamba thus presents himself as a victim of mafia interests and claims to be ready to pay the price for a fight for justice and for the nation. The trial is seen as a test for the independence of the Congolese judiciary and the fight against impunity. It should be recalled that this is a key promise of Felix Tshisekedi. This trial is truly dividing public opinion. Some see it as an anti-corruption operation, like what we commonly call the fatigants, that is, the fervent supporters of Felix Tshisekedi. But for others, especially Mutamba's supporters, they denounce it as political score settling. According to the description we gave of Mutamba, you have concluded that he is a 37-year-old man, a former presidential candidate. And so, through this trial, he is truly playing for his political future. A conviction could result in up to 20 years in prison with no possibility of appeal. The Court of Cassation rules as the court of last resort. If you have been following me closely, you might now be asking yourself, but why would Constant Mutamba want Judith Suminwa to appear in this trial? Constant Mutamba is requesting the appearance of Judith Suminwa, the Prime Minister, Rose Mutombo, former Minister of Justice, Jules Alingete, former, let's say, Inspector General of Finance, Didier Budimbu, former Minister of Hydrocarbons, Alexis Gisaro, Minister of Public Works, and Didier Budimbu, who is also currently the Minister of Sports. So why is he requesting their appearance? Is to strengthen his defense in his trial for alleged embezzlement of those $19 million US. From our considered and informed point of view, here are some highly likely and compelling reasons behind this particular strategic approach, which we will carefully lay out as well-reasoned hypotheses, or, let us say, carefully considered positions that may not be absolutely definitive, but are certainly much more plausible and indeed quite compelling. First reason, Mutamba is aiming for the validation of procedures. I'm not talking about judicial procedures, but rather procedures at the level of government management. Why do we say this? Constant Mutamba claims that the Kisangani prison construction project, which is at the heart of the accusations, followed legal procedures and had the approval of Prime Minister Judith Suminwa. By having her appear, Constant Mutamba is therefore seeking to prove that his decisions were approved at the highest level of government, which could then, at that point, exonerate his personal actions. The second significant reason is much more closely related to the specific Congolese institutional context and its unique characteristics. By summoning Rose Mutombo, his predecessor, let's put it that way, at the Ministry of Justice, Mutamba might at this point want to demonstrate that the practices or decisions related to the project date back to a time before he arrived at the ministry and, from this perspective, involve other officials. This could also, in that case, dilute his personal responsibility by saying, listen, what I was doing were things that were already being done before. Why are you prosecuting me when you are not going after those who started it before me? So that's one of the reasons behind Constant Mutamba's defense strategy. Third reason, from our point of view, Mutamba is, in this respect, trying to challenge the accusations. For example, by mentioning Jules Alingete as Inspector General of Finance, who probably played a role in the audit or in reporting the alleged irregularities. Mutamba could thus be seeking to confront him in order to challenge the conclusions of the Inspectorate General of Finance, which accuses the project of being fictitious. Fourth reason, Mutamba would like to involve other actors. The request for Didier Budimbu and other prominent figures to appear is probably aimed at broadening the scope of responsibility. Mutamba may be suggesting that other members of the government or high-ranking officials were involved in the management of funds and public contracts, which would strengthen his claim of a political plot against him. Here, simply by saying, look, in the case of Budimbu, for example, the facts, Mutamba's supporters or those closely affiliated with the leaders of DIPRO released some documents, including a letter from Didier Budimbu requesting discretionary funds for the renovation of the Kisangani Stadium. An astronomical amount of over $14 million. To this day, we have no evidence of any renovation of that stadium. At the same time, to be precise, we also have no information that the money was actually released. But at the very least, there is a letter where Budimbu requests this money. And so from this perspective, Mutamba simply wants to point out, look, there are several people involved in this case. Why aren't you prosecuting them? You're only prosecuting me, Constant Mutamba. This is precisely what strongly supports the compelling idea of a significant political plot being orchestrated against me. The fifth crucial reason, from our considered point of view, is simply a comprehensive political defense strategy. Because by insisting on the appearance of these high-profile figures, Mutamba is also trying to politicize the trial, presenting it as a persecution orchestrated by rivals. This fuels his narrative that he is being targeted for his judicial reforms and his fight against corruption, while also drawing media and public attention. In short, this specific request for their appearance aims to strategically shift the focus away from the serious accusations against him and to clearly show that these actions were indeed guided by collective decisions or explicitly approved, and to fundamentally undermine the very idea of personal responsibility. This is part of an aggressive defense strategy designed to counter the serious charges that could potentially result in up to 20 years in prison. Depending on how this significant trial unfolds, we can also ask ourselves another crucial question. What potential consequences could this trial have on the overall credibility of Felix Tshisekedi's government? Well, the significant and highly anticipated trial of Nkosi Mutamba, the former Minister of Justice, who was rigorously prosecuted for the substantial embezzlement of a staggering $19 million in connection with, as I previously mentioned, the extensive construction of a new and much-needed prison facility in Kisangani, has, in our considered view, truly profound and far-reaching implications for the overall credibility and public trust in the current government led by Felix Tshisekedi and Judith Suminwa. Here is our analysis of the potential consequences, of course based on the political context, the accusations and public perception in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I could even add also within the diaspora and perhaps even among so-called neutral observers. The first consequence, therefore, is the loss of credibility related to the fight against corruption. Because the Mutamba affair is just yet another embezzlement scandal since Felix Tshisekedi has been acting as president, you understand that, in the end, this would simply confirm the trend that everyone has already noticed. Mutamba has requested the appearance of Prime Minister Judith Suminwa, Rose Mutombo, and others such as Judah Lindgeth, Adler Kisula, and Senaref from the Senaref. And well, if irregularities involving these figures are confirmed, it could tarnish the credibility of the entire government, suggesting complicity or negligence at a very high level. There is also the perception of the Congolese justice system being used as a tool. Accusations of politicization. From this point of view, Mutamba and his supporters describe the trial as political score settling aimed at neutralizing an ambitious reformer who denounced corruption and Rwandan influence. This narrative resonates with a segment of the population that doubts the independence of the judiciary. So if the trial is seen as biased, it could reinforce the image of a government using judicial institutions to eliminate political rivals, as in the case of the trial against Joseph Kabila. The fact that other officials involved in similar projects have not been prosecuted, as pointed out by Mutamba's associates, further fuels the suspicion of selective targeting. This therefore undermines the legitimacy of Felix Tshisekedi's anti-corruption efforts, which risk being seen as opportunistic rather than systematic. We can also mention an impact on public trust. This is especially true when considering popular frustration. There is currently growing discontent toward the Tshisekedi government, which is accused of having achieved nothing in addressing insecurity in the East, the economic crisis, and the limited improvement in purchasing power. The Mutamba trial, therefore, if seen as yet another scandal, risks worsening this sense of distrust. And on the international level, relations with our financial partners, for example the DRC, which relies heavily on international aid, particularly from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, to finance its development. Allegations of embezzlement in the Kisangani project could then raise concerns among these partners, especially if high-ranking figures like Suminwa are involved. This could lead to increased scrutiny or the suspension of certain funding. Another consequence may be at the level of regional reputation. In the context of tensions with Rwanda and the conflict with the M23, the Mutamba trial, which accuses the government of diverting attention from the real security issues, could damage the DRC's credibility in regional forums such as the African Union or the Southern African Development Community, SADC, in turn. Now, after analyzing all these consequences, we can also ask ourselves questions about, all right, let's talk about the possible scenarios and their impact on this credibility. We may not fully comprehend the profound secrets of God, but we can still reasonably estimate that if Mutamba is found guilty, a conviction could temporarily strengthen the public image of a government determined to effectively fight corruption. That's perhaps the positive side, especially if the funds are recovered. However, if the trial is seen as biased or if other officials escape prosecution, this could intensify accusations of manipulation. On the other hand, a conviction without evidence. Mutamba's acquittal could also galvanize the opposition, especially Mutamba and Kabila supporters, thereby reinforcing the narrative of an authoritarian regime ready to crush its opponents. And what if Mutamba is acquitted then? That's another question we can ask ourselves. An acquittal of Mutamba could validate these accusations of political plots, undermining the credibility of the Congolese justice system and, by extension, the Tshisekedi government. It could also restore Mutamba's standing as a prominent opposition figure. If Sumi Noir or other officials are found to be involved in irregularities revealed during the trial, it could trigger a major political crisis, possibly even resignations or a government reshuffle. On this particular point, I do have some doubts in the sense that we're talking about a government that consistently tends to manage things precisely as it sees fit. And in a recent meeting between Tshisekedi and his Sacred Union, it seems to me that Julien Sumi Noir is quite certain to be reappointed. If the trial proceedings stall or are significantly suspended, particularly in the case of a prolonged postponement or an extended suspension, as was specifically recommended in the Kabila trial by Sensa, this strategic approach could potentially help to significantly ease existing tensions in the immediate short term. However, it could also inadvertently give the distinct impression that the government is actively avoiding making a definitive decision on a particularly sensitive and crucial matter, which would, in turn, undoubtedly harm its overall credibility regarding its commitment to transparency and open governance. So, my dear compatriots, this is precisely what we can comprehensively say about the significant Mutamba trial in this particular edition of our truly in-depth and detailed topic of the day. We will now conclude this very first episode of the in-depth topic of the day by providing you with a comprehensive timeline or a detailed overview of this significant trial and what precisely lies ahead in the unfolding legal proceedings. The prosecutor at the Court of Cassation, Firmin Vonde, has requested authorization from the National Assembly to prosecute Mutamba. This authorization was granted by 322 votes to 33, 139. So it was on June 15, 2025. Following this decision, Mutamba was banned from leaving Kinshasa and submitted his resignation on June 18, 2025. The opening of the trial before the Court of Cassation took place on July 9, 2025, but the hearing was then postponed to July 23rd to give the defense time to review the case file. At the July 23rd session, the judges rejected the objections raised by the defense and began examining the case. The trial was once again suspended, and postponed to July 30 for the continuation of the proceedings and possible final arguments. Mutamba is therefore going to file formal motions with the esteemed Constitutional Court in order to challenge the controversial law on open voting within the National Assembly and also the significant decision of the Court of Cassation, which effectively dismissed a crucial procedural objection. He, therefore, respectfully requested the immediate suspension of the ongoing trial, pending a definitive constitutional verdict from the highest court. And the next hearing is scheduled for August 4, 2025. So next Monday, tomorrow, considering the day we're recording this show, with the appearance of key witnesses, including officials from the General Directorate of Public Procurement and Friveo. The outcome will depend on the Constitutional Court's decision regarding the motions of unconstitutionality and on the evidence presented by the public prosecutor. It is still worth noting that Constant Mutamba appeared as a free man, not placed in pretrial detention, and remains presumed innocent until a final decision is made. The sentence he potentially faces if found guilty is nonetheless remarkably severe, up to 15 or even 20 years of rigorous penal servitude, all in strict accordance with the Congolese Penal Code. In conclusion, dear viewers and internet users, the highly significant Mutamba trial unequivocally highlights the profound tensions between the pursuit of justice, the intricate world of politics, and the ongoing arduous fight against pervasive corruption within the Democratic Republic of Congo. It raises questions about the transparency of public funds, judicial independence, and political rivalries, while being closely monitored by civil society and international observers. The trial of Constant Mutamba represents a major challenge to the credibility of the government of Felix Tshisekedi and Judith Assumino. It exposes weaknesses in the management of public funds and fuels suspicions of the justice system being used as a tool in a context where the population is already frustrated by insecurity and economic hardship. The summoning of figures like Judith Assumino risks heightening internal tensions and tarnishing the government's image, both nationally and internationally. The outcome of this trial, which is set to move forward at the hearing on August 4, 2025, will therefore be decisive. Transparent and fair management could strengthen the government's legitimacy, but any sign of bias or irregularity could worsen the crisis of confidence and bolster the opposition. To limit the damage, the government will therefore need to demonstrate a genuine commitment to transparency and reforms while avoiding an escalation of political tensions. So, my dear compatriots, those are the few words I had prepared for you regarding this first edition of today's in-depth topic. Thank you for following us. Peace and love, brothers and sisters. So be it, and what is said is said. I'll see you again in a future broadcast. Stay tuned to Tele Changu, the web TV channel dedicated to a culture of excellence.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to get first-hand news. See you next.